This one. This is my husband.
Him? The maintenance worker?
Wait.
What?
You don't expect your life to end on a Tuesday. You certainly don't expect it to end with a 7-foot-tall, pale-skinned alien aristocrat pointing a perfectly manicured finger at your grease-stained face, turning to her entourage, and declaring you her husband. I just wanted to fix the damn radiator. The service corridor of Orbital Station Charlie 9er smelled exactly like what it was. A metal tube filled with recycled air, oxidized copper, and the lingering, sour stench of 3,000 unwashed dock workers. Arthur lay on his back, the grating pressing rigid lines into his spine. His knuckles were bleeding, again. The plasma manifold he was trying to wrench open had seized shut sometime during the last standard cycle, and the heavy iron spanner in his hands was doing nothing but stripping the bolts. He cursed, a low, breathy sound that vanished into the constant, teeth-rattling hum of the station's failing life support. A drop of dirty condensation fell from an overhead pipe, landing directly in his right eye. Arthur blinked furiously, smearing a mixture of hydro grease and sweat across his face with the back of a calloused hand. He tasted salt and machine oil. He was 32. His knees already clicked when it rained, or when the atmospheric pressure simulators pretended it was raining, and he was currently earning 8 credits an hour to keep the station's lower promenade from suffocating. He didn't hear the procession at first. He felt it. The deck plates beneath his spine began to vibrate, not the chaotic, shuddering rattle of the cargo loaders, but a rhythmic, synchronized thud. It was the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps, moving in perfect unison. Arthur rolled his head to the side, peering through the dim, flickering amber light of the maintenance hatch. The heavy blast doors at the end of the corridor slid open with a sharp pneumatic hiss. The air in the corridor changed instantly. The sour smell of sweat was pushed back by a wave of cold, hyper-oxygenated air that smelled bizarrely of crushed mint and ozone. Arthur stopped breathing. He froze, the spanner slipping slightly in his greasy grip. They were not humans. They were an embassy delegation from the core worlds, the kind of beings that didn't belong in the lower decks of a rust bucket trade station. There were 5 of them. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, wrapped in armor that didn't look like metal. It looked like carved ivory, seamless and matte, absorbing the flickering light of the corridor. In the center walked 3 women, or, at least, the translator implants in Arthur's jaw pinged with the closest human designation for their gender. They wore draped garments of heavy, dark fabric that shifted like liquid oil. Their skin was an unnatural, flawless alabaster, completely devoid of pores or blemishes, but their eyes were entirely black. No whites, just deep, glossy voids. Arthur pressed himself flat against the grating. "Don't look down. Don't notice me." He held his breath until his lungs began to burn. In his experience, when core worlders came down to the slums, someone was about to die, disappear, or be taxed into starvation. The one in the middle stopped. The entire procession halted instantly. The silence was absolute. Even the station's ambient hum seemed to cower. She turned her head. Her dark eyes locked onto the maintenance hatch. She looked right through the shadows, right through the grime, and stared directly into Arthur's watering eyes. Arthur's heart slammed against his ribs. A cold spike of pure, primal adrenaline shot down his arms. His mouth went completely dry. He tightened his grip on the spanner, a pathetic, useless gesture. What was he going to do? Hit an alien aristocrat with a wrench? Their personal kinetic shields would turn his arm to jelly before the metal even made contact. The woman stepped closer. She moved silently, her boots making no sound against the grating. She stopped just a foot away from the open hatch. Up close, she was terrifying. The sheer scale of her. Her breathing was slow, deliberate. He could smell that mint and ozone scent rolling off her in waves. It made the back of his throat itch. She tilted her head. Her facial structure was almost human, just stretched. The cheekbones too sharp, the jaw too narrow. Then she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It didn't reach her solid black eyes. It was a baring of teeth, perfect, squared, chalk-white teeth. She slowly raised a hand. She had 4 fingers, each ending in a dull, dark nail. She pointed directly at Arthur's face. He was paralyzed. His brain screamed at him to scramble backward, to crawl into the vent and disappear into the station's bowels, but his muscles refused to fire. She turned her head slightly to look at the two women standing behind her. Her voice, when she spoke, didn't come from her mouth. It bypassed the air entirely and translated directly through the rusted implant in Arthur's jaw. The voice was smooth, cold, and carried a localized vibration that made Arthur's molars ache. "This is my husband," the voice echoed in his head. The two women behind her let out a sound. It was sharp, a series of clicks that the translator hastily rendered as amused, dismissive laughter. The woman looked back down at Arthur. The smile remained. Arthur's throat worked. He swallowed nothing. "What?" he croaked. His voice sounded pathetic. Small. A rat squeaking in the dark. He didn't get another word out. Two of the ivory-armored guards moved. They didn't walk. They closed the distance with a terrifying, fluid speed. Hands clamped onto Arthur's shoulders. The grip was absolute. It felt like being caught in an industrial vice. He tried to thrash, instinct finally overriding his paralysis. He swung his elbow backward, connecting solidly with the guard's torso. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up Arthur's arm. It felt like he had struck a solid concrete pillar. His elbow flared with agony, and his arm went completely numb. "Hey, wait, stop!" Arthur yelled. His voice cracked. He kicked his boots against the grating, scraping his shins, but they hoisted him into the air, as if he weighed nothing. The spanner clattered to the deck, the sound ringing hollow in the quiet corridor. The alien woman didn't look back at him. She simply turned and continued walking. The guards dragged Arthur behind her, his boots dragging uselessly against the metal floor. Panic is not clean. It doesn't make you hyper-aware or give you slow-motion reflexes like the action vids pretend. Panic is messy. It's a physical sickness. As the guards hauled Arthur through the station, his stomach cramped violently. Acid crawled up his esophagus. He tasted bile. His breathing was short, rapid, and shallow, hyperventilating until black spots danced at the edges of his vision. He struggled, thrashing his legs, twisting his torso. He might as well have been a toddler throwing a tantrum. The guards didn't even adjust their grip. The pressure on his collarbones was bruising, cutting off the circulation to his arms. He could feel the cold, rigid surface of their armor pressing against his ribs. It didn't feel like metal or ceramic. It felt slightly porous, like bone. They dragged him past Sector 4, the main promenade. There were humans here. Merchants, dockhands, scavengers. Arthur saw Frank, his shift supervisor, standing outside a noodle stand, holding a styrofoam cup of synthetic broth. "Frank!" Arthur screamed, his voice raw and tearing at his throat. "Frank, help!" Frank looked up. He saw the towering core worlders. He saw the pristine ivory armor. He saw Arthur, dangling between them, covered in grease, and terrified out of his mind. Frank slowly, deliberately, turned his back and took a sip of his broth. Arthur felt a wet, hot tear track through the grime on his cheek. Not from sadness, but from pure, impotent rage, the utter abandonment. He was dead. He was being taken by the local lords to be dissected, tortured, or sold to a mining colony where the atmosphere would liquefy his lungs in a year. They passed through the heavy security checkpoints, leading to the upper habitation rings. The station security underpaid human rent-a-cops stepped aside immediately, lowering their eyes. The air grew cleaner. The flickering neon lights of the lower decks were replaced by soft, seamless luminescence. The smell of rust faded, entirely swallowed by that oppressive sterile scent of ozone and mint. They reached a set of massive, polished doors. The metal was a dark, bruised purple. It parted silently as the woman, the one who had smiled at him, stepped through. The guards dragged Arthur inside and unceremoniously dropped him. He hit the floor hard. It wasn't metal. It was covered in something thick and yielding, like a dense layer of moss. He scrambled backward instantly, ignoring the shooting pain in his numb arm, pushing himself away with his heels until his back hit a smooth, curved wall. He pulled his knees to his chest, breathing heavily through his mouth, his eyes darting wildly. The room was vast. It didn't look like a spaceship cabin. It looked like a terrarium. Soft, bioluminescent plants hung from the ceiling. The furniture was all curved, grown rather than built, made from pale, smooth wood. It was entirely alien, beautiful, and completely terrifying. The guards turned and walked out. The heavy purple doors sealed shut with a soft, final thud. Arthur was alone with the three women. They had removed the heavy outer layers of their dark cloaks. Underneath, they wore tight, woven tunics that looked like spun glass. The one who had claimed him walked to a low, curved table and poured a clear, viscous liquid from a geometric decanter into a shallow bowl. The other two watched Arthur. Their solid black eyes were unreadable, but their posture, the relaxed tilt of their hips, the way they stood close together, screamed casual amusement. "Stella," one of them said. The translator implant chimed, providing the closest human name equivalent. Her voice was higher-pitched, sharp. "You cannot be serious. Look at it. It is leaking fluids." Arthur realized she meant him. He was sweating profusely. He wiped his face with a trembling hand, smearing more black grease across his forehead. The one holding the bowl, Stella turned around. She took a slow sip of the liquid. "Beatrice." "Daphne," Stella said, her voice thrumming in Arthur's skull. "You lack vision." "It smells like decaying organic matter," Daphne said, her upper lip curling slightly. Arthur's hands patted his pockets frantically. He needed a weapon, something. His fingers brushed against the hardened plastic handle of his flathead screwdriver, tucked into his thigh pocket. He gripped it. It was pathetic. A 6-inch piece of metal against beings who could probably crush his skull with 2 fingers. But the cold plastic in his palm gave him a tiny, desperate anchor. "What do you want?" Arthur forced the words out. His voice shook. He hated that it shook, but he couldn't control the adrenaline spasms rocking his chest. "I don't have money. I don't have anything. If this is about the ventilation tax, I swear I didn't bypass the meter." Stella walked toward him. She moved with a terrifying grace. Every step was measured, perfectly balanced. She stopped a few feet away and knelt down so she was closer to his eye level. Even kneeling, she was massive. Arthur tightened his grip on the screwdriver in his pocket. "If she touches me," he thought, his brain racing in a frantic, cornered animal loop. "I go for the eye. I drive it straight into that black void. He wouldn't survive it. The guards would rush in and tear him apart. But he wouldn't die on his knees waiting for it." Stella looked at him. She didn't look at his face. She looked at his body. She looked at his thick, calloused hands, the grease stained permanently into the cuticles. She looked at the heavy, reinforced boots he wore, scuffed and dented from dropping engine blocks on them. She looked at the thick cord of muscle in his neck, currently tight with absolute terror. "You are human," Stella stated. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Arthur rasped. Stella tilted her head. "Arthur Pendelton, born on the terrestrial colony of New Harmony. Relocated to Station Charlie 9er 4 standard cycles ago. Occupation, Level 3 maintenance engineer." Arthur's stomach dropped further. "You hacked the station registry." "It hardly required hacking," Stella said, her lips curving into another cold smile. "Your station administrator sold me your entire species manifest on this sector for a fraction of a credit." Arthur swallowed. "Of course he did. So what? Why me? Why the hell did you tell them I'm your husband?" Beatrice let out another clicking laugh from across the room. "He squeaks," she noted, highly amused, "like a frightened prey beast." Stella held up a hand, silencing her. She focused back on Arthur. "Because, Arthur Pendelton," Stella said, softly, the vibration in his jaw dropping to a low, intimate hum. "I require a monster, and you are going to play the part." Arthur stared at her. The panic in his chest hit a sudden, jarring speed bump of pure confusion. "A monster?" he repeated. He looked down at himself. He was wearing stained, high-visibility orange coveralls, patched with duct tape. He weighed maybe 180 pounds, soaking wet. He got winded walking up 3 flights of stairs because the station's artificial gravity was slightly miscalibrated. "I fixed toilets," Arthur said. The absurdity of the situation momentarily overrode his fear. "I unclog plasma scrubbers. The most dangerous thing I do is eat the synthetic meat from level 2. Stella stood up smoothly, turning her back on him. She paced toward the massive, arched window that looked out over the sprawling, junk-filled orbit of the station. "You do not understand your own context in the wider galaxy, Arthur," Stella said. "My species, the Kalan, rule 3 sectors. We are diplomats. We are scholars. We conquer through trade, through treaties, through the slow strangulation of economic dependency." "Boring," Arthur muttered, instantly regretting it. But he couldn't help it. The cynical defense mechanism he used to survive the lower decks was kicking in. Stella paused, looking back at him over her shoulder. Her black eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a flicker of something else. "Approval?" "Exactly," Stella said. "We are refined, but politics in the core worlds has become brutal. A coalition of military factions, led by an upstart named Richard of the Vane, is moving to challenge my family's seat on the High Council. They believe we have grown soft. They believe we lack the capacity for violence. So hire a mercenary," Arthur said, slowly uncurling his legs, realizing she wasn't about to kill him immediately. "Hire a Krogan, or whatever the hell the big scaly guys with the guns are called. Don't grab a plumber." Daphne walked over, folding her long, elegant arms. "We cannot hire mercenaries. It shows weakness. It shows we must purchase our strength." She looked at Arthur with mild disgust. "A mate, however. A bonded partner. That brings their strength into the family line." Arthur rubbed his aching elbow. "Okay. So, marry a Krogan." Stella turned fully around, her expression hardening. "You still do not grasp it. You think you are insignificant because you live in your own filth. You do not realize what humanity is to the rest of the galaxy." Arthur frowned. "We're cheap labor. We build the crap you don't want to build. We fix the pipes." "You are Deathworlders," Stella said. The word carried a heavy, ominous weight in the translator. "Your species evolved on a planet with a biosphere, actively trying to kill you. You have microorganisms in your saliva that would melt a Vane's respiratory system. You possess a skeletal density 4 times the galactic average. Your bodies are packed with redundant organs, hyper-aggressive immune responses, and you produce a localized chemical stimulant, adrenaline, that allows you to tear your own muscles off the bone to achieve bursts of violent kinetic energy." Arthur blinked. "I mean, yeah, but I pull a muscle if I sleep on my neck wrong." "To us," Stella continued, ignoring him, her voice rising with an intense, calculated energy. "Humanity is terrifying. You are the apes that cracked faster than light travel not through elegant mathematics, but by strapping yourselves to volatile nuclear reactors and hoping for the best. You are considered feral, unpredictable. The boogeymen of the dark sectors." Arthur sat there, letting the words wash over him. The absurdity was staggering. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, not from adrenaline anymore, but from exhaustion. "Let me get this straight," Arthur said, his voice dropping the squeak, settling into a flat, exhausted deadpan. "You claimed me as your husband, because to your political rivals, bringing a human to a dinner party is like showing up with a rabid attack dog on a leash." "Precisely," Stella said, walking back over and looking down at him. "Richard of the Vane believes I am weak. When I arrive at the Galactic Summit tomorrow, with a Deathworlder mate, a creature known for unhinged violence and primal brutality, he will hesitate. He will fear what I have aligned myself with. It will buy me the time I need to secure my coalition." Arthur slowly pulled his hand out of his pocket, leaving the screwdriver behind. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. His head was throbbing, a dull, rhythmic ache behind his temples. "You're crazy," Arthur muttered. "You're all out of your minds. I can't be an attack dog. Look at me. I'm trembling. If someone points a gun at me, I'm going to piss myself, not bite their face off." "You will not need to do anything," Beatrice spoke up, stepping forward. "You simply need to stand there. Look menacing. Scowl. You humans are remarkably good at scowling. Your facial features are very blunt. And if they call your bluff? Arthur asked, dropping his hands, looking up at Stella. What if this Richard guy decides to test the scary human? What happens when he punches me and I fold like a wet napkin? Stella's black eyes locked onto his. The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. Then you will die, Stella said, completely devoid of emotion. And I will be assassinated shortly after. So I highly suggest you tap into that feral primate instinct your species is so famous for. Arthur stared at her. The scent of mint and ozone was making him nauseous. He was a mechanic. He owed 600 credits to a local loan shark. His left boot had a hole in the sole. And now, he was the terrifying mythical husband of an alien aristocrat, expected to intimidate a galactic warlord. Arthur let out a slow, heavy breath. He looked around the pristine, softly lit alien room, then looked down at his grease-stained hands. A dark, bubbling sense of hysteria rose in his chest. It wasn't funny, but it was so incredibly stupid that his brain didn't know what else to do. He started to laugh. It was a broken, wheezing sound. The three alien women stared at him. For the first time, Beatrice and Daphne shifted uneasily. The sound of human laughter, raw, cynical, and tinged with actual madness, sounded harsh and violent in the quiet room. Arthur wiped a tear from his eye, smearing the grease further. He looked up at Stella, a grim, exhausted smile stretching across his face. "All right," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "You want a monster? Fine. But I'm going to need a shower, a stiff drink, and if I survive this, you're paying off my debts." Stella looked at him, her dark eyes unreadable. But slowly, the corners of her mouth twitched. "Deal," she said. The sonic shower felt like being sandblasted with microscopic glass. It stripped away the hydro grease, the sweat, and what felt like a millimeter of Arthur's epidermis. He stood in the narrow, curved cubicle, shivering uncontrollably as high-frequency sound waves vibrated the dirt out of his pores. It smelled strongly of burning dust and ionized air, a sharp, chemical tang that coated the back of his throat. When the cycle finally ended with a low, bass-heavy hum, his skin was raw, flushed red, and hypersensitive to the cold air of the dressing chamber. Daphne had left a set of garments on a smooth, pearl-colored bench. Arthur picked them up, his fingers clumsy. The fabric was heavy, completely unyielding, and possessed a subtle, shifting iridescence that made his eyes ache if he stared at it too long. It felt less like woven cloth and more like the overlapping, chitinous shell of a deep-sea crustacean. He pulled the trousers on. They were too tight in the thighs and too loose in the waist, clearly tailored for a biology that didn't align with a human male's proportions. The tunic was worse. It locked his shoulders into a rigid, upright posture, the stiff collar pressing uncomfortably against his Adam's apple. He caught his reflection in the polished metallic surface of the bulkhead. He looked ridiculous. He looked like a tired, terrified mechanic shoved into a costume for a high school play about space royalty. His brown hair, usually matted down by a greasy cap, was dried out and sticking up at odd angles. The dark bags under his eyes stood out starkly against his pale, scrubbed skin. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a victim. The heavy purple doors hissed open, and Stella stepped into the antechamber. She had changed as well. Her fluid dark cloaks were gone, replaced by a structured, angular dress of stark, blinding white. It made her look taller, sharper, like a blade carved from ice. She stopped, her solid black eyes sweeping over him, assessing the damage. The scent of crushed mint and ozone washed over him again, stronger this time, carrying an underlying note of something sharp and metallic. "It will have to do," Stella said, her voice thrumming directly into his jaw through the translator implant. "The fit is imperfect, but the rigid lines exaggerate your natural breadth. It makes you look suitably dense." "I feel like I'm wearing a dining room table," Arthur muttered, pulling uselessly at the collar. "If I have to bend over, this whole thing is going to tear right down the middle." "You will not be bending over," Stella instructed, walking toward the exit, and expecting him to follow. You will be standing at my right side. You will not speak. You will not react to the noise. You will simply look forward and allow them to project their fears onto your silence. Your silence is your weapon, Arthur. They walked through the station's upper promenade, flanked by Beatrice and Daphne, and an escort of 6 ivory-armored guards. The atmosphere here was drastically different from the lower decks. The air was perfectly temperature-controlled, smelling of synthetic jasmine and sterilized water. The floor beneath Arthur's stiff, unyielding boots was a seamless expanse of polished black stone. The Galactic Summit was being held in the Grand Concourse, a massive, domed structure that protruded from the station's central ring, offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the gas giant the station orbited. As they approached the towering gilded entrance doors, the sheer volume of sound hit Arthur like a physical blow. It wasn't the mechanical roar of the engineering decks. It was the chaotic, overlapping cacophony of 100 different species talking, arguing, and negotiating in 100 different languages. The translator in his jaw clicked furiously, struggling to prioritize the overlapping audio streams, sending sharp spikes of localized pain through his teeth. The doors parted. Arthur stopped breathing. The room was vast, an architectural nightmare of conflicting styles. There were tiered balconies, floating platforms, and sunken conversation pits. The light was harsh, a piercing blue-white glare that reflected off the polished surfaces and the metallic armor of the attendees. And the attendees were terrifying. Arthur saw creatures that looked like walking masses of fungal blooms, towering reptilian bipeds with scales the color of dried blood, and gelatinous entities encased in transparent pressure suits. "Do not stop." Stella's voice vibrated sharply in his head. She didn't look back at him. She kept her chin high, her stride unbroken. Arthur forced his legs to move. His knees felt weak, the joints trembling with every step. He focused on the back of Stella's white dress, using it as an anchor in the storm of sensory overload. As they moved down the sweeping central staircase, a ripple of silence began to spread through the crowd. It started near the entrance and washed outward, a sudden heavy hush that was far more intimidating than the noise had been. Thousands of alien eyes, sensors, and ocular stalks turned toward them. Arthur could feel the weight of their stares. It was a physical pressure, a suffocating, prickly heat that gathered at the base of his neck. He realized they weren't looking at Stella. They were looking at him. He was the only human in the room. He knew what humanity's reputation was, Stella had told him, but feeling the collective apprehension of a room full of galactic power brokers was entirely different. They saw his blunt, hairless face, his heavy jaw, the forward-facing, predatory set of his eyes. They didn't see Arthur, the mechanic, currently nursing a mild stomach ulcer and a terrified heartbeat. They saw a death worlder. They saw a creature that evolved to run down its prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his face completely neutral. The effort of suppressing his mounting panic twisted his facial muscles into a hard, flat scowl. His eyebrows knit together, his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ground against each other. "Perfect," Beatrice murmured from behind him, a note of genuine approval in her clicking voice. "You look as though you wish to murder the entire room." "I wish to throw up," Arthur whispered back, the sound barely escaping his lips. They reached the floor of the concourse. Stella navigated the crowd with practiced, arrogant ease. The various alien dignitaries parted for her, stepping back to leave a wide berth, their eyes constantly darting to Arthur. He kept his hands balled into tight fists at his sides, his knuckles white, hiding the violent tremors shaking his fingers. Then, the crowd ahead of them didn't part. It solidified. Standing in their path was a group of beings that made Stella's guards look frail. They were massive, heavily muscled bipeds with thick, charcoal gray skin that looked like hardened volcanic ash. They wore overlapping plates of dull, heavy metal, and the air around them smelled of sulfur and rancid, cooked meat. In the center stood the largest of them. His face was a brutal, flattened expanse of bone and scar tissue. He was missing one of his small, deep-set red eyes, replaced by a glowing, mechanical optic that whirred as it focused on Stella. This was Richard of the Vein. "Stella," Richard said. His voice was a deep, guttural rumble that didn't need the translator to convey its aggression. It reverberated in Arthur's chest cavity, rattling his ribs. "You are late. I assumed you had finally realized the futility of your position and surrendered your family's seat."
Stella stopped a polite distance away. She offered a smile that was entirely composed of sharp edges. "Richard, I apologize for my delay. I was detained by a matter of personal consequence."
Richard's glowing optics snapped away from Stella and locked onto Arthur. The red light washed over Arthur's face, tracing the lines of his rigid, tense posture. Richard let out a low, hissing breath that smelled like a lit match. "A human," Richard rumbled, his voice dripping with heavy theatrical contempt. "The core worlds hear rumors of these apes. They say you are savage, unbroken, but looking at it now, wrapped in your silk, Stella, it looks small. It looks frail." Arthur stood frozen. His heart was hammering against his sternum so violently he thought it might crack the bone. The sheer physical presence of the alien warlord was suffocating. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to sprint back up the stairs, to hide in the ductwork. "He is not a pet, Richard," Stella said smoothly, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "He is my husband, and I would advise you not to mistake his silence for weakness." Richard laughed. It was a wet, barking sound that echoed off the high ceiling. He stepped forward, closing the distance. He was so close Arthur could see the individual, jagged pores on his gray skin. "A husband?" Richard mocked. He reached out with a massive, four-fingered hand, the skin calloused and rough as sandpaper. "Let us see just how fragile this Deathworlder is." Richard's hand moved with startling speed for a creature of his size. He didn't punch. He reached out and clamped his massive fingers down onto Arthur's left shoulder. The intent was obvious. It was a dominance display. He wanted to squeeze, to drive Arthur to his knees in front of the entire assembly, to prove that Stella's terrifying human was nothing more than soft, easily broken meat. The alien's grip was immense. It was the weight of an industrial trash compactor closing around Arthur's collarbone. Pain, sharp and blinding white, shot down Arthur's arm and up into his neck. He felt the fabric of the stiff tunic bite into his skin, felt the muscles beneath his collarbone compressing, threatening to tear. For exactly 1 second, Arthur was going to comply. His knees began to buckle under the sheer, agonizing pressure. The logical, surviving part of his brain told him to fall, to submit, to let the warlord have his victory so he wouldn't crush his spine completely. But then, the adrenaline hit. It wasn't a gentle surge. It was a chemical explosion in his bloodstream, a massive, primal dump of pure epinephrine, triggered by the absolute certainty of his own impending death. The localized terror vanished, entirely overridden by the deeply buried, evolutionary fury of a cornered primate. The pain in his shoulder didn't disappear, but it suddenly ceased to matter. It became fuel. Arthur didn't think. He reacted. Years of wrenching seized, rusted bolts in zero-gravity environments had taught him one very specific thing. When something is bigger and stronger than you do not pull away from it. You use leverage. You find the fulcrum, and you break the joint. Arthur stepped into the pressure instead of pulling back. He drove his right foot forward, planting his heavy, steel-toed work boot solidly onto the instep of Richard's left foot. The alien let out a startled, hissing grunt as the human's dense skeletal weight pinned his foot to the floor. Simultaneously, Arthur brought his right hand up. He didn't throw a punch. He opened his hand, mimicking the shape of a wrench clamp, and drove the webbing of his thumb directly upward into the underside of Richard's wrist, right on the cluster of thick, ropey tendons supporting the alien's grip. Arthur's muscles, flooded with adrenaline, contracted with desperate, hysterical strength. He gripped the thick wrist, locked his elbow, and twisted his entire torso violently to the left, using his own core weight to torque the alien's arm. There was a sound. It was sharp, loud, and sickeningly wet. It sounded exactly like a dry tree branch snapping under heavy ice. Richard roared. It wasn't a rumble of intimidation. It was a high, shrill shriek of genuine, unexpected agony. His grip on Arthur's shoulder released instantly as the bones in his lower forearm fractured under the localized, twisting pressure. But Arthur wasn't done. The primate brain was in full control, and the primate brain dictated that the threat must be neutralized entirely. As Richard stumbled backward, clutching his ruined wrist, his massive, heavy head dipped down. Arthur, already leaning into the torque, used the momentum of his own twisting body to snap his head forward. He drove his forehead directly into the bridge of Richard's flattened, scarred nose. The impact was jarring. A flash of bright light exploded behind Arthur's eyes. His neck compressed painfully, and a sharp, metallic taste flooded his mouth. He felt the alien's facial cartilage crush under the density of his human skull. Richard of the Vein, a galactic warlord, an 8-foot mountain of muscle and hardened ash, staggered backward. His heavy boots tangled, and he hit the polished black floor of the concourse with a resounding, earth-shaking crash. He lay there, his mechanical optic whirring erratically. Dark, thick blood pouring freely from his shattered face, gasping for air. Absolute, profound silence descended upon the grand concourse. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Thousands of pairs of alien eyes stared at the fallen warlord, and then slowly, terrifiedly, shifted to the human standing over him. Arthur stood there, swaying slightly. His vision was swimming. His forehead throbbed with a dull, heavy agony, and warm blood, he wasn't sure if it was his or Richard's, was trickling down the side of his nose. His chest heaved as his lungs desperately sucked in the synthetic jasmine air. His knuckles were white, his hands trembling with residual, violent energy. He looked down at Richard. The alien was groaning, trying to push himself up with his one good arm. "Don't," Arthur rasped. His voice was completely destroyed, a low, wet gravel that scraped out of his throat. "Don't touch me again." He didn't scream it. He didn't roar. He just sounded incredibly tired, annoyed, and dangerously unstable. To the rest of the room, he sounded like a predator offering a final, generous warning before it tore out a throat. Stella stepped forward. She moved with an eerie, unhurried grace, stopping perfectly beside Arthur. She did not look at him. She looked down at Richard, bleeding on her polished shoes, and then swept her dark, fathomless eyes across the silent, staring crowd. "As I said," Stella announced, her voice echoing flawlessly in the dead silence, smooth and chilling, "he is my husband. If there are any further inquiries regarding the legitimacy of my family's position, you may address them to him." Nobody spoke. A coalition representative from the outer rim visibly took a step backward, raising his manipulators in a gesture of submission. Stella turned smoothly on her heel. "Come, Arthur. We are finished here." Arthur didn't remember the walk back to the ship. The adrenaline was crashing, draining out of him rapidly, and leaving behind a hollow, nauseating void. His knees shook violently. His shoulder felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. His head pounded in rhythm with his rapid heartbeat. By the time the heavy purple doors of Stella's private chambers sealed shut behind them, he was finished. The rigid, alien tunic felt like a straitjacket. He didn't make it to the curved, mossy seating area. He staggered 2 steps into the room, dropped to his knees, leaned over, and violently dry-heaved onto the pristine, bioluminescent floor. His stomach cramped painfully, bringing up nothing but burning acid and saliva. He stayed on his hands and knees, coughing, shivering, staring at the small puddle of spit. He heard the soft rustle of fabric. Stella walked over to him. She didn't call for the guards. She didn't express disgust. She simply stood near him, watching him shake. After a long minute, Arthur sat back on his heels, wiping his mouth with the back of his trembling, blood-smeared hand. He looked up at her. He expected to see the same cold, calculating amusement she had worn when she first claimed him in the maintenance corridor. Instead, her black eyes were studying him with an intense, quiet curiosity. "You broke his radius," Stella said softly, the vibration in his jaw barely a whisper. "You shattered his primary sensory ridge. A vein has not been physically bested in a public forum in 3 centuries. You did it in under 4 seconds. Arthur let out a weak, breathy laugh, leaning his head back against the curved wooden wall. He closed his eyes. I panicked. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't want him to snap my collarbone. It does not matter why you did it, Stella replied. She knelt down, her blinding white dress pooling around her on the floor. She reached out, her four-fingered hand moving slowly, and gently wiped a streak of dark alien blood from his cheek with her thumb. Her skin was freezing cold. What matters is that they saw it. You have given me the sector. Arthur Pendelton. Arthur opened his eyes, looking at her pale, sharp face. He was exhausted. He was terrified. But as he looked at this towering, terrifying alien aristocrat who had just used him as a political bludgeon, he realized something absurd. She had kept her word. He wasn't dead. My debts, Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. You said you'd pay them. Stella's lips curved. It wasn't the baring of teeth she had shown him in the corridor. It was smaller, softer, almost genuine. Your debts are erased, Stella said. She stood up, looking down at him with a strange, respectful finality. In fact, I believe you have earned a considerable stipend. Rest now, husband. Tomorrow, we negotiate the trade routes. And that wraps up Arthur's wild, chaotic plunge into galactic politics. Will his terrifying reputation hold, or will the core worlds discover he is just a terrified plumber with a lucky right hook? If you enjoyed this deep dive into human survival instincts and alien high society, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an update from us. Stay stellar, everyone.